Hi there, I'm your host McAuley Tucker, and you're listening to The McAuley Tucker Show, the podcast where I sit down with some of the most accomplished and fascinating individuals in the entertainment and business industry. From celebrities to industry leaders, our guests offer unique perspectives and inspiring stories that will educate and inform you. Join me as I sit down with my next guest to cover their humble beginnings, challenges they faced, as well as their accomplishments in life. You are bound to learn something new, so sit back and enjoy the interview. Today on the McAuley Tucker Show, we have a very special guest, Nicholas Tabarrok. He is a film and television producer who has a very interesting story and is based in Toronto and Los Angeles, starting out as a simple production assistant and then soon, over the years, becoming a professional producer. I hope you enjoy this interview, so sit back and enjoy it. What's really fascinating about you is in conversations before, you've shared a bit about your family history. And you've spoken about the story about your grandfather and his three brothers that I believe fled from Russia. And they invented the last name that you have now. And I know with a lot of the things that we do in our life, our family and our upbringing, it has an impact on what we do. And so I was curious to ask, with your family history, can you think of anything? Did it impact your life whatsoever when it comes to perhaps your identity and the approach to risk that you do in the film industry?
Well, first of all, I applaud you on your homework. I wasn't expecting that question or that reference. That you've done some research. Um, I thank you for that insightful question. So, my grandfather was a very successful merchant, and he, as you said, was in Russia. And I won't retell the whole story here, but his father, so my great grandfather, died when my grandfather was young. I think he was 20, and he had three younger brothers and his mother, of course. So he became the head of the household quite young and very successfully built up a business trading, importing, exporting many different products, principally bicycles in Iran. Um, I grew up in Canada, so I didn't spend a lot of time or have a great deal of contact with my grandfather. So I think and my father was an academic. He was a university professor. But I do think through sort of DNA or osmosis, that sense of trade and merchant and business and negotiating certainly did seep into me. Um, it's funny, as I said, my father was an academic. He taught university. However, in his blood, he was a trader, and I would go and see him, buying cars or stereos or whatever, furniture, whatever it was that we had to buy for the household. And he just was a natural negotiator and trader, and he loved it and enjoyed it and so forth. So I definitely think, yeah, so it's a very, very indirect way. I think that seeped into me. And without ever being directly taught something, I learned a tremendous amount about dealing and negotiating from witnessing it. And I think that the singular most key thing that I learned is it, in a negotiation, mistakenly, many people think it's about besting the other person, taking advantage, getting ahead of them somehow. And it isn't. A good negotiating, both sides win. That both sides come out feeling satisfied. Both sides come out feeling, okay, that's good. I got what I wanted out of this. Of course, there's always, the buyer wants to pay less, and the seller wants to charge more, obviously. But there should be a place at which both sides leave the table feeling good about it, because in this business, certainly you want to go back to those people again.
Hmm.
So I'm going off on a long
No worries.
tangent here, but I think it does answer your question in a long way, is that again, I wasn't there to witness my grandfather build this business, so I can't speak from firsthand knowledge. But my presumption is he was a very successful merchant and trader because the people he dealt with appreciated dealing with him and would go back to him and do so over and over and over again. If he ever mistreated or took advantage or something, that would be that would be a very small victory because then you can't continue to build upon it. So I think that's the singular lesson I learned, and from my heritage.
Wow. I really appreciate you sharing that. And there was a lot of really cool antidotes that came from what you said there. The most really cool thing that I thought was specifically university. You mentioned
Yes.
that you're, I think was you said your grandfather taught university? Was it correct? Am I correct?
No, my
Your
father.
father. What's
Yeah.
really cool about that is we'll talk about this later on, but in I think it was in 2018 you taught film producing at
Yes.
Shanghai University. So it's kind of cool to see how your father taught university, and in a way that would later be something that you would do.
Yep.
What's something really cool as well that you shared is something that I've seen a pattern of speaking with people from Hollywood is their family's jobs and their family's career or their earlier career. It usually oftentimes doesn't have a tie to Hollywood, but over time something begins to happen. And that leads to my second question. You grew up in Toronto, as you mentioned, and you've mentioned in conversations you felt kind of aimless as a teen, and you didn't really envision a career in Hollywood. But it was when you read a magazine that when things changed, you saw kind of the world of being a producer. So I wanted to kind of bring you back to that moment that you described as an epiphany and really inspiring.
Yeah.
What would you say was the specific thing in that article that really stood out to you about being a producer that got
Yeah.
you into this?
This is a long time ago. I'm not a young man, but I remember it so vividly because it really, you used the word epiphany, and it really was an epiphany without, being too dramatic about it. It really was an epiphany. I didn't know what I wanted to do for a career. Really couldn't figure things out, and I was sort of what I always kind of struggled with was. I really like creative endeavors. Like I love music, I love reading, I love books, I love art. But I'm not a pure artist. I don't
Mhm.
have the creative ability to be a painter, a writer, a musician. And I've always enjoyed business, as I just said. I've always liked, it sounds very nerdy, but I actually like playing with spreadsheets. I actually like Excel and getting in there and kind of getting into to budgets and profit and loss statements and analyzing them and studying them and so forth. And I enjoy contracts and negotiating. And the challenge was what career satisfied both sides of that brain.
Mhm.
It's pretty rare, right? Jobs and occupations tend to be sort of right brain or left brain. And I was kind of figuring out what can I do that kind of satisfies both. And as you said, I was in university and I read this magazine article about film producing, and it both, oh my gosh, this job is a creative job because you're working with writers and you're working with directors, you're working with actors. So it really stimulates the creative output. But it's also a business job.
Mhm.
You're assembling financing, and you're selling your film, and you're reviewing budgets and putting together contracts and so forth. And you do both of those things. And that was like, wow, this could be amazing. And I'm really pleased to say that I didn't know anything about the business when I read that article. And it proved out to be true, that it wasn't sort of a false expectation, that the job really does do that. That really provides the ability to have a foot in both those worlds.
It is a mix of those things. There's a mix of
It
the
is.
creativity, but there's also a mix of business. And you mentioned there your love for spreadsheets and things like that.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, that's something that people don't really like or don't really enjoy, and so it's something that very few people can actually go through. So it's really amazing to hear that that was something that you fell in love with. What's even
Yes.
cooler is, as you mentioned earlier, your family history. It's the more you speak about your life, you can kind of see that pattern and kind of that drive towards the business and getting things done. What I thought was really cool about you is you've described yourself before as a blue collar producer, and
Mhm.
you've climbed up the different ladders. What really stood out to me was you kind of started out as a production assistant, a PA. Just a
Yeah.
little bit ago, I was working as a production assistant, not working, but interning, I guess you could say, as a production
Yeah.
assistant on a small TV show about the local hangings here in my city. And that was a really
Oh,
interesting
cool.
experience. I got to finally not really, maybe for the first time, experience this world that you and other people that I've spoken to speak about all the time. And I did get a bit of experience in London, Ontario, when they're filming a movie starring Luke Wilson. And that also took me to that world too. So, reflecting kind of in your earlier roles, specifically in physical production and kind of
Yeah.
being present, what challenging aspects would you say that you encountered, and what fundamental lessons from that earlier hustle continues to shape how you work today?
It's a great question. So, I'm going to slightly answer a different question. It's
Mhm.
sort of overlapping with what you asked me, but it's slightly different. But I'm still going to answer your question after
Mhm.
that. The big lesson I learned in hindsight was that unfortunately it was the wrong path. The blue
Mhm.
collars that, put blue collar producer was the wrong way to go. I didn't know anybody in the film business. I had no connections, and I was in Toronto. So I didn't know any better. So I took a job on a film, and as a PA and production accountant, production assistant, production manager, line producer, and so forth. But what I learned looking backwards is what a producer does, what I do today has very little to do with the physical production of a movie, So I became really good at knowing how to, somebody says, whatever, here's $10 million, go make a movie. I really knew how to hire a crew and rent the gear and book the locations and close the deals with the unions and oversee production and make sure we stayed on schedule, make sure we stayed on budget. And those are necessary skills, but it's not what a producer does. That's what a line producer or a physical producer does. What I do now as a producer, it's a desk job. It's an office job. It's not about being on set. I read scripts, I package material, I work with writers, I reach out to agents, I put cast on things, I deal with directors, and then I do my best to finance the movies. So what a producer does is 90 to 95% in an office long before the cameras start rolling. So so being on the physical side of production, being on set, isn't really particularly valuable to what I do now.
Mhm.
It plays a small role in that when I'm making a film, at least I understand that part of it. So I can look at a budget and a cost report and a schedule and understand it and kind of be able to talk to the line producer and the AD and say, no, let's do this instead of that, or well, why are you doing it this way, or why are we over in these costs, or I don't think you've budgeted this correctly. But again, that's not a huge part of my job anymore. So
Yeah.
that's the hindsight, kind of looking backwards about that lesson. What so that's the indirect question. To answer your question directly, the biggest lesson I learned about that job and th that experience I had, those years building that side, was morale is is so important because crews work really hard, and the what you get out of a happy, satisfied, respected crew is invaluable. And it's so much more important than, desperately trying to squeeze everything out of the last, penny or whatever. Because, well, how am I trying to say this? That you'll get more by a crew that feels they're respected and content than by trying to just drive the last, um,
Mhm.
making the most out of every dime being spent. And I'll illustrate that as best I can. I don't think I'm expressing it very well, but I'll illustrate that with a kind of a rule that I had. I had what I call the $50 rule. And, this is 20 years ago, so probably should be called the $100 rule now. And that is, if ever a crew member asked for something that was, 50 bucks or so, even if I thought it was wasteful, even if I thought it was unnecessary, always say yes.
Mhm.
Because in saying no to somebody does more harm and morale than you've saved by saving 50 bucks. That if you say yes to somebody and you feel to, okay, I hear you, let me try to support you in your job, they'll might work an extra 15 minutes towards the end of the day and not put it on their time card. They may go a little bit late on lunch because you have to get the shot and finish before the day, and they'll say, that's fine, don't worry about it. I'm not going to charge a meal penalty. They may, work a little harder to make sure that their equipment doesn't get damaged. And by giving them a $50 allowance and saying, sure, absolutely, no problem, you will save $1,000, I guarantee you, by just the crew member feeling that they are respected and part of the team and not being denied at every time they go.
Mm.
And it's the same with, directors. Directors may ask for something that, you know, a random example, do you need four cameras in this scene? Four cameras is expensive. It's the camera rental, but then it's also the people involved. So they may say, oh, to get this scene right, I need four cameras to get it from every angle. And I may think, it's not necessary. It's wasteful. We're never going to use this angle. We can capture it too, but say yes, because then the director feels, okay, I'm respected, I'm listened to, I'm getting my vision told, and you're going to get more out of that person. So that's sort of the rule I learned that think of the human part of it. Don't think of it just numbers on a page. Think of how people are going to feel about coming to work every day.
That kind of connects like earlier what you were talking about, with your grandfather and how people must have, you assume people must have loved to work with him, and going to now what you're talking about now, it's really about being kind to people. For what I've learned, working in sales, is you really got to be a people person. You got to be a
Yes.
people person. You got to be focused on those around you, and that really is foundational when it comes to every situation, even film. You need to be there for people around you. It's a team effort. What's really cool about you is you still have right now, you have a production company that you've started, I think, since the 90s. I'm not sure the exact year, but you started that on your kitchen table in your house. It was a really interesting story. And so I want to hear a bit about that. That experience, how easy was that? You've spoken a bit before about the numbers and logistics. Were you aware of how to start one? What do you recall the most challenging when making that a reality?
It was hard. It was challenging. Um, I did start the company in the 90s. You're right, very late 90s. I don't want to age myself too much. I don't want to overage myself, but the very late 90s. And but the incorporation date of the company isn't really when the company started, if you know what I
Mm,
mean. You know, I was forward thinking. I certainly wanted to have a production company. So whatever date I incorporated the company, it was probably a few years between, okay, here's my company to actually having it be its own going concern,
mm.
That was in the 2000s that it really became a company. And even then, when I say it became a company, I'm talking about a tiny little company, this isn't Warner Brothers. Um, but it was very challenging because I always wanted to make my own movies, be a
Mm.
producer of material that I owned and controlled, and I create my own work. But it's incredibly hard to do, in the very beginning, especially. So what I was doing was I was what's called service producing, where I didn't own the movie, I didn't finance it, I didn't put it together, but another producer, typically an American, because I was based in Canada at that time, would come to Canada and say, I want to make a movie in Canada. I'm going to hire you to look after the production for me. So I was service producing to make money, and to have a living. But then in the side, I was trying to make my own movie. So I was looking for scripts, optioning scripts, trying to put directors and actors on it, and looking for financing. And so it was really long days, and when I wasn't service producing for someone else, every spare minute I was trying to put my own movies together. And the first few years, the early 2000s, I was doing both simultaneously. I would service produce because I had to pay the rent, and I would be trying to make my own movies. And it was probably, I don't remember exactly, 2004, 2005, where I was able to finally no longer service produce. I don't make movies for anyone else. I don't make movies that I don't own. And now I am a sole um, producer of movies that I've created and developed myself.
Well, that definitely makes a lot more sense understanding the background behind it. It doesn't happen overnight, as you mentioned. It's a progress
No.
for things to happen, and for progress, there's been a lot of that. There was a TV show, forget about it. You worked on that one for a couple of years, actually. I think in the early 2000s you started that one, and that one took a long time to make. Things take time.
Yeah.
One of the coolest things that stood out to me, and you've highlighted before in conversations, like one of the biggest things in your life was in 2009 when Defendor went to TIFF,
Yeah.
that experience, and there was that 2 a.m. bidding war, and that was very, very cool. And I wanted this was a challenging one because I didn't really know how to approach this question, but I was thinking about it earlier, and I said, I don't know how bidding wars happen. I'm not really sure what a bidding war looks like, and so I was curious to ask you, were you up at 2 a.m. during this? What does a bidding war look like for films? And how does that happen between two companies that don't really know each other?
Yeah, that you again, you've done your homework. You really, I don't know where you're getting this from, but that's very, very cool. You've got these questions and you've done your research. That was a really fun and cool experience, and what kind of every independent filmmaker hopes for. That's the dream, right? And it's happened to me a couple of times. But yes, exactly how it sounds. I was definitely awake at 2 a.m. Dealing with phone calls. So Defendor played TIFF 2009. You're absolutely right, and it was really popular. And we had Woody Harrelson, who's a great actor, and Sandra Oh and Kat Dennings, and the great Elias Koteas. Peter Stebbings wrote and directed it. So it was a really good film, and people wanted it. And exactly as it sounds, it's sort of like an auction, at an auction house, where the paddles are going up and so forth, except it's all done over the phone. And I don't remember the companies now because 2009 is a long time ago. But one company would say, uh, you know, I, I'll use invented numbers.
Yeah,
A, because I don't want to disclose,
yeah,
confidential information, and B, because I don't remember exactly.
yeah,
But one company would say, okay, I'll give you $1 million. And another company would say, okay, I'll give you 1.2, okay, 1.4. And it's truly like, this is like, the movie screened in the evening. I couldn't tell you what time, but 7, 8 p.m., something like that. And then, what happens is, the movie comes out and you're at an after party, and that's when the distributors start making phone calls. And it really was. I remember standing out at a parking lot at 2 o'clock in the morning. And that's when Sony, who ultimately ended up buying the movie, sort of came up with the highest number, and
yeah,
whether it was we closed at 2 a.m. I remember having lunch with the Sony execs a day or two later. So we had closed by that time, but whether, at 2 a.m. was the final doing or the next morning we kind of tidied up the details. I don't recall exactly, but yeah, it really was that sense of the phone with one offer, then the next, the next, the next, and it kind of slowly grew and grew and grew. It was really, really fun and exciting. I enjoyed that night.
it sounds like it was an amazing night and an amazing experience for that to happen. I've spoken with an individual who I believe also had a similar situation. I'm not sure if there was a bidding war, but he made the movie Hoodwinked, which was a cartoon film back in the days, and it was the Harvey Weinstein company.
Oh
The
yeah,
Weinstein company got it, and so that was a whole situation, a whole thing as well. But it sounds like it was an exhilarating time and a
it was.
dream that's like, it must have been a blessing for that to happen. And that experience after that, you've continued to work on so many different projects. And I want to really bring on to this because this is really cool. You for several months, I'm not sure how many months, maybe 6 or 8 months, were at Shanghai University
Yeah.
and you were teaching film there. Now that's a very really fun situation. It must have been a very interesting time. Was there? You must have learned or have found some interesting things there while you were there. Was there any students or anything that while you were there, that was like, wow, this is something I had never known before. Wow, this is very fascinating because you're there teaching, but you're also going out and eating food or
Yeah.
fellowshipping with people in that area. I'd love to step into that world for a little bit.
Yeah, it was only 3 months. I mean, 6 or 9 months would have been amazing, but it was only 3 months. Um, I absolutely loved it. I loved every day of it. The truth is, and this is probably not a very satisfying answer, it's probably an unsatisfying
Hmm.
answer. I didn't, as you said, I was there to
Yeah.
teach, filmmaking, producing. And the Shanghai Film University very deliberately wanted professors from the West. They wanted a Western style filmmaking. So they want to know how films are made in, the Hollywood, so to speak. So that's why they hired me and other, professors there. Um, consequently, I didn't learn a lot about Chinese filmmaking. So, if I
Mm.
had gone there to make a movie or I had gone there to work with another producer, I'm sure I would have learned a lot about, wow, this is how it's done over here. Things are very different and so forth. But I didn't have that experience. So I didn't immerse myself in filmmaking in China because it was sort of the reverse. I was there to teach them how we do it here. But that said, I loved being in Shanghai. I love big cities, and it's one of the biggest cities on earth. I think it's, like, at the time, 25 million people, 30 million people, something like, in one city. So, the city of Shanghai was nearly the population of all of Canada,
Wow.
so it was phenomenal and a great city. I mean, it was so, despite China being the communist, it is like the most Catholic commercial city on earth, like and I'm not going to go all the way to Shanghai and spend my nights in a hotel room. So I would go to the university, teach from 9 to 5-ish, it kind of varied a bit, but basically, teach from 9 to 5. And then as soon as the day was done, I would hop in a cab, their version of Uber, and head down, and I'd try a new area, wander a different place. And I mean, you could live a lifetime in Shanghai and
Mhm.
not experience it all. So for the 3 months that I was there, I could go out every single night and have a new experience, a new bar, a new restaurant, a new area to wander around. And I'm a big architecture fan, so these new
Hmm.
modern buildings, huge skyscrapers. You go to a huge modern skyscraper one night, and the next day you go to a 1,000-year-old neighborhood, these little cobblestone streets and so forth. It was a fascinating, thrilling experience, and I really, really enjoyed it.
And what's really cool about that as well is you've gone to, I forget if I would correct me if I'm wrong, for one of your productions, you were on an island. I believe it was an island, or it was something that you were on.
Correct.
That must have been cool as well. So you have actually quite a bit of experience traveling around. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but you mentioned architect. I know that you're a huge fan of the Getty Museum. So we'll talk a bit about that because I've got a really interesting question involving that. But
Okay.
with film, there's always highs, but there's always lows. And one thing that I've always learned is even at the lows in our life, without the lows, we wouldn't necessarily be able to grow or learn. And I know you've hinted at this in conversations before about some harder years, specifically between 2019 and 2020, where there was not
Mhm.
many greenlit projects, offices were closing and some staff had to go. Without dwelling on the negatives, what was perhaps one of the hardest personal sacrifices that you had during that time? And how would you say that that strengthened you to push forward towards bigger goals that you then would have, let's say, in 2022 when you produced, that really beautiful film that was involving the Holocaust?
Yeah, what an insightful question. Any business has up years and down years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every business is going to have moments that are and years that are good and bad. But the film business more than most, because if you own a retail or a manufacturing business, or you're a law firm, whatever you can choose, there's a certain degree of regularity,
Mm-hmm.
that in most businesses, outside of a pandemic or some global event, you you, you can reasonably assume and project that March should be more or less like February, hopefully it's growing a little bit. And 2019 is kind of going to be like 2018 and should be like 2020 and so forth. But the film business doesn't work that way because, and not just for a small company like mine, but for even the largest companies, it's just the nature of the business. You can have really, really busy and huge highs at one point, and then the next year you can have huge lows. I mean, if you look at the biggest companies, Warner Brothers, Netflix,
Mm.
whomever you want to choose. Actually, Netflix is a bit different because they're on a subscription model, so they are a bit more regulated, which of course the brilliance of their model. But if
Mhm.
you look at the older studio system, Disney, they're going to have a huge hit Marvel movie, Deadpool 1 year, and then the next year nothing works. So that happens to all of us. And so the lesson is, I mean, it's going to sound so kind of cheesy and kind of uh, unoriginal,
Yeah.
but it's really the best lesson I can pull out of it is perseverance
Mhm.
and sort of keep at it. You just have to know that okay, I'm going to keep working hard, keep doing what I'm doing. And when I say keep doing what I'm doing, also be thinking, well, what can I be doing differently? Where's the industry going? What changes are happening that I should be aware of and adapting and so forth? So you got to be able to think, okay, how do I adapt? How do I change? How do I future-proof my company and myself?
Mhm.
But just sort of keep at it, and just hope that those changes are coming, and hope that it's going to turn around again, and knowing that this is just the nature of the business.
Exactly. And you never know what's going to happen. That's why the
You don't.
persistence is very key. And you've highlighted that throughout your life. And that persistence, of course, has been very helpful because in 2022 and 2023, you were involved in a wonderful film that was involving the Holocaust. And you actually you went to the TIFF premiere. What was really cool there is the daughter of one of the main character was there as well as one of the survivors. And so I wanted to kind of ask you, you've worked on so many different types of, you've produced and helped, and you were involved in so many different types of films and genres. What would you say really pushed you towards this one? Was there, maybe perhaps your love, maybe perhaps your history and your fascination with different things, or is there a genre or preference that you're drawn towards more? Because I know you've worked on some true stories, you worked on some
Mhm.
comedies, you've worked on, you've spoken about how you like to make things that are different, dark comedies and things like that, but also serious films. What about this one really pushed you to work on
Yeah, the film you're referencing is Irina's Vow,
it? Mhm.
and it's the true story of a young woman. She was 18 years old at the time, living in Poland, and when the Nazis invaded, um, she was conscripted to work as a maid in the highest ranking Nazi soldier in that town she lived in. And then while she was there working as a maid in his house, she took in and hid 12 Jews and kept them alive during the whole Holocaust.
Mm.
Yeah, during the Holocaust, while the Nazis were in Poland. So an incredible act of bravery and a real, sort of Schindler's List type story, and a
Yeah.
wonderful, beautiful, heartwarming story during a terrible time. So what drew me to it was that for almost all my films, I mean, kind of entertainment based, it's
Mhm.
purely, like I hope the audience enjoy it, hope audience have fun, whatever the case may be. But this is the first film that really, to me, uh, had a deep resonance, like a human resonance and impact and importance. And I thought, this would be a great addition to the movies that I've made because it just has it speaks to larger themes. I'd never to that point tackled a film of that kind of weight and significance. So I felt it was important, and I felt that it was something that I should try to bring to screen. Irina Gut was her last name. She really deserved to have her story told, and she deserved the world to know about it, what she did. And again, it's a cliche, but these things repeat themselves. We're seeing some terrible things happen right now, and reminding audiences of what happened in the Holocaust, I think is important. I think it's important that we keep these horrible times in history in our awareness so that hopefully we don't repeat them.
And history
Mm.
is very important, and in history and showing that history is even more. and important as well. And working on these productions as well, even this one, it must be, I'm not sure if this is your part or if it's the writer's part, but learning about it, understanding it, going back and the
Yeah.
continuity and making sure this is accurate, that must also be so fulfilling too if you are the one who experiences that. It's a grind working in these films. It's there's rejection, there's long timelines,
Yeah.
and you have to constantly stay optimistic. And in all this chaos, it's good to find something to do in your pastime or have your interests. And for you, you mentioned earlier you love architecture. You are a big fan of the Getty Museum, but also
Yeah.
you enjoy the food at, I believe it's a place in LA, no Nobu, what's it called?
Oh,
Malibu.
Nobu.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
there's tons of different things. So I was really curious, like with your interests outside of film, what are you really drawn to? Is like for me, I'm really big into collecting vinyl. You can't really see it, but I've
Oh,
got two shelves full of just records that I've inherited. I love, even though I love film, even though I do work in some small things here and there, I love film, and so I love watching movies. But for you, what would you say really draws you towards architecture or even, eating wonderful food?
now I'm starting to be worried if you're, eavesdropping on my phone calls or reading my emails, because I don't know where you'd get Nobu Malibu from. I don't know how on earth you unearthed that. And the Getty, actually. I can't ever remember, you know, talking about either of those things in any kind of remotely public forum. So
You
I'm
have.
impressed by your research. Yeah. I shudder to think if you interviewed somebody, really famous, Tom Cruise, how much research you'd have to do, how much written material there has been about someone like that to be as comprehensive as you have been with me. Um, um,
Appreciate it.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I am a foodie. I do love food. Nobu is one of the world's greatest chefs and phenomenal food. But I think what makes Nobu Malibu, so Nobu has many restaurants around the world, and not most, sorry, in major cities, including Toronto, relatively recently. But Nobu Malibu, I think what makes that so special is, of course, it's the food, but it's this beautiful wooden restaurant right on the beach in Malibu. So not only are you eating this great food, you've got one of the world's greatest views. You've got the Pacific Ocean, you're looking out on the ocean and the water and the breeze. It's just such a wonderful experience. So that is a special. And it's funny, we're having this interview now. I have friends visiting from out of town next week, and I have a reservation at Nobu Malibu. What is today? Tuesday, a week and a half from now. So next Friday, I'll be at Nobu Malibu. Um, uh, so yes, I love that for both its visual and culinary
Mm.
excellence. Why I don't know why I'm a huge fan of architecture. I think I love visual things. Like I
Mhm.
love I love art. Um, but I think architecture in particular, because it serves a purpose, like I think a painting, like I've got around me here, can visually be um, appealing, but it only exists to be a painting. Architecture is can be visually beautiful, but it also people are housed there. Either they live there, or it's a museum, or it's an office building, whatever the case may be, or a hospital or church, whatever purpose it serves, it has a practical application in addition. And of course, many, like most architecture, don't. Your typical house and tract housing and so forth, or your office tower. So I'm not saying every building, very, very few of them have visual beauty, but those that do, I just really find incredibly satisfying because, okay, not only have you provided, for the sake of example, a place to live, but it's so visually stunning. So yeah, it's just purely a hobby. I have no business occupation in the world of architecture, but as as a hobby, I enjoy it.
That's a really great hobby, and there's so many beautiful buildings in this world. Here in my city, in Woodstock, we have a lot of Victorian-looking
Oh, cool.
buildings. They filmed a Amazon Prime TV show about Muhammad Ali, the boxer's life, and they used my
Oh,
downtown area for a parade
oh,
scene. So hey, if you're looking for some locations for your next film, hint,
yeah,
hint, nudge, nudge, come to Woodstock. They'd love you here. And
good
I,
to
I was
know.
able I was able to work as a location support person there. It was beautiful seeing everyone dressed up in these costumes. And buildings are amazing. You must also see within your filming. I mean, at least when you're not like in a green screen area, but you get to see buildings and get to see the world around you. You know, one wrapping kind of up before I ask you about some upcoming projects. Looking back in conversations, you've talked about how you wished you jumped into the television world sooner because it's a very
Yeah.
rich environment, and you wish you spent less time on set, which you spoke about a little bit earlier in our conversation. If you could rewind to one specific moment in your career, maybe it could just be what I mentioned here involving jumping into TV, it could be something different.
Yeah.
What would be the path that you would take, and how might that journey have shaped who you are today if you had gone in a different direction?
Yeah, you nailed it on the head. It really would be if I could rewind to the beginning of my career. I very deliberately and consciously said I want to make feature films. You
Mm-hmm.
know, now 20, 25 years later, I am equally films, television is all appealing to me. We're working in both and so forth. I wish I had started that way because
Mm-hmm.
as you referenced, the TV medium is so incredibly rich for storytelling now, you know? And I think the reason why I didn't is because that's relatively new. In the age of the medium, that's, with some exceptions along the way, it's relatively new that that series with such heft and intellectual depth and captivating arcs as Sopranos and Breaking Bad and True Detective and so forth have come to the medium. But I would love to do more TV, and I wish I'd started sooner. So I think that would be if you could rewind the clock 25 years and I'm starting my career, I would sort of spend at least 50-50, if not even more, but at least 50-50 of my time and energy into film and television.
And who knows, maybe a project that you'd have worked on would have become as successful as the ones that you're working on now, but of course in TV form. And who knows what doors that can open. But it's not too late. There's definitely a lot of
Oh, no,
opportunities
no,
right now.
we're doing our best to rectify that by pushing into television. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we never know. There's a lot of great opportunities now with streaming and even
Yeah.
YouTube. There's so many different projects, and involving
Yes.
that, you're working on a really cool project. The name has left my mind, but I hear that you are really enjoying this project, and you're hoping that maybe it could win some awards. You've talked about how you really want to win an Oscar. From what you can tell, from what you can share, because I do know in this business it's a very hush hush. Things have to be signed.
Yeah.
But from what you can share, what are you looking forward to the most this year or these next couple of years in your world with your projects? And what can we be looking forward for?
Yeah, I am going to speak in very general terms
Yeah,
because you just don't know what's going to get made ever. So
yeah,
what I don't like to do, and not, I don't mean just here with you now. I mean, and as a general business practice, because
hmm
when you work with writers, directors, understandably, especially young, newer ones, they're really eager to get it out there. Hey, can we put out a press release? Can I put this on IMDb? I said, no, like because there's a really good chance that this will never get made, and it just looks bad to say, hey, we are working on this, show XYZ, whatever the name of the film is, and then it doesn't happen. So I really don't mention titles and people and so forth until the film is greenlit, and then you can start talking about what what the film is all about because it's going to get made and it'll get to the public eventually.
hmm
So speaking in generalities, um, we just took out a television series a week ago that we went out to a bunch of pitches, both in Canada and here in Los Angeles, which I'm really excited by. And we'll be hearing the result of those pitches in the next few weeks. So I got my fingers crossed about that. It'll be very exciting. I made a feature film last year, towards the end of last year. We just completed post recently called 109 Billion Followers,
Yes.
which I'm really, really excited by. The great J.K. Simmons, phenomenal actor, along with Olivia Simmons and Nina Arianda and Jake Ryan. So a great cast all around. And that one we're hoping to get out to the festival circuit, towards the fall of this year. So excited to see how the audience receive that movie. And I'm putting together some new films. So, I have so, some films have some cast. I'm putting on others. Some films are going out for cast for the first time now, but putting new packages together. So a bunch of things that I'm really, really excited by. Maybe we'll have a conversation next year and I can look back and I can say, remember that thing I didn't tell you the title about? Well, now I can tell you because it's getting made, so that's the
Of
hope.
course.